Well, a couple of years ago, I first met Noel Pearson, and during the course of a long evening at his place, he told me the story of Chris's life, some of it, and without knowing any more about him.
Daniel Day-Lewis is by the near-universal and rarely disputed agreement of critics, directors, and his own frequently astonished fellow actors, quite simply the single greatest and most completely committed screen actor of his entire generation, and very possibly the most extreme, uncompromising, and self-endangering practitioner of what is called method acting, who has ever lived or ever will. He is the only man in the entire long history of the Academy Awards to win the Best Actor Oscar 3 separate times, an almost untouchable record that stands completely and utterly alone above all his peers. And he built that towering, legendary reputation not through charm or good looks or by being a dependable, familiar, bankable movie star, but by disappearing so completely, so obsessively, so single-mindedly, and at times so genuinely alarmingly into his characters that he essentially ceased, for many months at a stretch, to be Daniel Day-Lewis at all. He does not, in the ordinary sense, act his roles so much as he utterly and bodily becomes them, in body and mind and voice and gait, unset and off, waking and sleeping, week after week, and month after month, until the fragile line between the performer and the part dissolves away completely, and there is essentially nothing of the original man left to be seen anywhere at all. Colleagues have described the experience of working with him as unnerving, like acting opposite a real stranger who happens to wear a familiar face. And here is the honest truth that shapes any story about him. Day-Lewis is not a feuder, not a diva in the ordinary self-important Hollywood sense, and not a collector of grudges or resentments against his fellow actors. He is, in fact, a famously private, gentle, thoughtful, softly spoken, and even quite shy man away from his work, so profoundly serious about his craft that he would rather vanish from public life for years at a stretch than ever compromise it, and who twice stepped away from acting entirely, the second time apparently for good. Between films, he retreated so far that he once spent years quietly working as an apprentice shoemaker in Florence, Italy, wanting nothing to do with the movies at all. His real battles were never once with rival performers or fellow stars. They were always with himself, with his own body, with his own mind, and with the genuinely terrifying question of just how far a single human being can possibly go, and how much of himself he can bear to surrender in the relentless pursuit of the deepest truth of a character. So let's go through the 6 most extreme, obsessive, self-punishing, and genuinely astonishing transformations of Daniel Day-Lewis's legendary career, the times he pushed himself so far past all reasonable limits that you simply will not believe what he willingly put himself through, starting with the very one that first announced his particular and singular kind of beautiful madness to the watching world. Christy Brown in My Left Foot. This is the transformation that won him his very first Academy Award and first revealed to a startled world the frankly frightening lengths to which this intense young actor was willing to go for a part. In Jim Sheridan's acclaimed and beloved 1989 film, Day-Lewis played the real-life Irish writer and painter Christy Brown, a man born with severe cerebral palsy who could control only his left foot and who used that single limb, against truly impossible odds, to create art and literature and to build a full life. And to portray him honestly, Day-Lewis did not simply study or mimic the physical condition from the outside. He lived inside it, completely and without pause, for the entire length of the production. He refused, flatly, consistently, and without exception, to ever leave his wheelchair while anywhere on set, staying rigidly and fully in character as a man with cerebral palsy from the very moment he arrived in the morning until the moment he was wheeled out at night, contorting his body and holding it in that difficult state for hour upon hour. This created genuine, constant, exhausting difficulties for absolutely everyone around him. On the production, the film's crew and production assistants were repeatedly forced to physically lift and carry the actor, still seated in his wheelchair, up and over the heavy, tangled masses of cables, lights, and equipment that littered the set, hauling him bodily from one camera setup to the next, all because he simply would not stand up and walk between takes like an able-bodied man. He even reportedly insisted that he be spoon-fed all of his meals by the crew during the production's lunch breaks, exactly as the real Christy Brown would have been fed, unwilling to break the physical illusion and reality of the character even for the few private minutes it took to eat his food. To some weary members of the crew, it was frustrating and even maddening, an actor stubbornly making everyone else's already difficult job harder for the sake of his own private and mysterious process. But the final result of all that discomfort and difficulty was a performance of such total, seamless, dignified, and profoundly humane authenticity that it instantly and permanently silenced every last doubter and skeptic and critic in the room, and it announced, right there at the very start of his leading career, that Daniel Day-Lewis would never ever, under any circumstances, do anything by halves, and that he considered his own physical comfort and convenience to be entirely, utterly irrelevant when set beside the deeper truth of the role. He won the Academy Award for it, the first of his three, and a legend was born fully formed. Hawkeye, in The Last of the Mohicans. If my left foot had proved that he would suffer perfect stillness and helplessness for a role, this one proved that he would go completely feral for it, vanishing bodily into the wilderness to physically become a man of the rugged 18th century American frontier. For Michael Mann's sweeping, romantic 1992 epic, Day-Lewis played Hawkeye, a rugged, capable frontiersman raised by the Mohican people, and rather than simply learn to look and sound the part, he set out, with characteristic totality, to genuinely become a self-sufficient survivalist capable of living off the raw land, exactly as his character would have had to. He underwent long, arduous, and intense wilderness and survival training out in the field, patiently teaching himself how to track game across open country, how to hunt with both rifle and bow, how to skin and butcher and prepare an animal for eating, and how to fend entirely for himself out in the deep forest with nothing but his own two hands and his wits. And then he took the whole thing to a genuinely astonishing and almost unheard of extreme. For the entire duration of the filming, Day-Lewis reportedly refused to eat any food whatsoever that he had not personally hunted, trapped, and killed himself with his own two hands, living precisely as a true hunter of that era and that place would have lived, day in and day out. He learned to load, prime, and fire his heavy period flintlock rifle while running at full sprint through rough terrain, and, still not content with all of that, he went off on his own and painstakingly taught himself the old, forgotten frontier craft of building a birch bark canoe entirely by hand from raw materials. He was not merely playing a frontiersman. For the entire length of that long shoot, he simply was one, in body and habit and instinct, carrying his loaded weapon slung over his shoulder with him everywhere he went, even far off the set, so that he never once had to step outside of, or break, the hard-won physical reality of the man he was portraying. It was less a role than an entire way of life that he adopted wholesale, without compromise, for the full duration of the shoot. By the time the cameras rolled, there was very little acting left to do, because he had already, quietly, over weeks in the wilderness, turned himself into the man. Jerry Conman, in the Name of the Father. For this searing, acclaimed 1993 drama, in which he played Jerry Conman, a real man wrongly and infamously imprisoned for years for a terrorist bombing he had absolutely nothing to do with, Day-Lewis pushed himself past mere physical hardship and deep into the realm of genuine, deliberate psychological ordeal, choosing to inflict real suffering upon himself in order to reach the emotional truth of a wrongly jailed, broken prisoner's despair. To honestly understand the crushing isolation, boredom, and torment of a man locked away alone in a prison cell, Day-Lewis arranged to have himself placed into real, functioning solitary confinement for multiple day stretches at a time, sitting completely alone in a genuine prison cell for days on end, simply so that he could truly feel what his character had been forced to feel. And, when it finally came time to film the movie's grueling, pivotal police interrogation sequence, he took his self-punishment even further still. In order to convincingly portray a man utterly broken by exhaustion, terror, and abuse, the actor reportedly kept himself deliberately, forcibly awake, denying himself all sleep, for 3 straight days and nights before shooting the scene, arriving to perform it in a state of genuine, unfeigned physical and mental collapse, barely able to stand. He even explicitly instructed members of the film crew to hurl buckets of cold water at him and to verbally abuse, harass, and torment him during the shooting of the interrogation scenes, so that the raw fear, disorientation, exhaustion, and utter helplessness visible on screen would be absolutely genuine, and lived, and not merely acted or imagined. It was a transformation achieved not through any costume, prosthetic, or makeup, but entirely through the willing, deliberate infliction of real, sustained physical and psychological misery upon his own body and mind, all in the single-minded service of emotional authenticity. Few actors in history have ever been willing to actually suffer in earnest for a part the way Day-Lewis routinely and matter-of-factly chose to. Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York. This is perhaps the single transformation that came closest to actually killing him outright, a genuinely alarming case in which his absolute refusal to break character in any respect whatsoever, however small, nearly cost him his life. For Martin Scorsese's violent, sprawling 2002 epic, Set in the brutal, teeming New York City of the 1860s, Day-Lewis played the terrifying, vicious, magnetic, and strangely charismatic nativist gang leader Bill the Butcher. And as always and without fail, his commitment to the part was total, absolute, and uncompromising. To master the character's grisly trade, he took on a genuine hands-on apprenticeship at an actual butcher shop, patiently learning the authentic 19th century techniques of cutting, cleaving, and carving meat until he could wield the heavy blades with a real, practiced, professional butcher's easy confidence. He insisted on always wearing only period-accurate clothing, right down to the last detail, even off-camera and away from the set. And that single, seemingly small insistence very nearly killed him outright. Because the film was shot largely in Rome, and because Day-Lewis flatly refused to wear a warm modern coat over his thin, authentic period costume out in the biting cold of the Roman winter, he developed a serious, deep, worsening case of pneumonia. And then, in an act of almost unbelievable, borderline suicidal commitment to the role, when he finally fell genuinely ill, he initially refused to take any modern medicine at all to treat it, on the stubborn grounds that antibiotics simply would not have existed in the grim world of Bill the Butcher in 1862, and he was not willing to break the historical reality of his character, even in order to save his own life and health. He reportedly came genuinely, frighteningly close to dying of that illness, before he was finally, with great difficulty, persuaded by those around him to accept modern medical treatment and antibiotics. And even setting aside the pneumonia, between takes he stayed so relentlessly, unbrokenly in character as the menacing, unpredictable, blade-wielding butcher, sharpening his knives and glaring at his co-stars, that he was, by all accounts, a genuinely intimidating and deeply unsettling presence hanging over the entire production, a man everyone gave a wide berth. To play a monster convincingly, he had, in a sense, allowed himself to briefly become one, and he would not set the monster down until the cameras had stopped for good. Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood. For his second Academy Award, in Paul Thomas Anderson's towering, monumental 2007 masterpiece, Day-Lewis vanished utterly into the character of Daniel Plainview, a ruthless, misanthropic, turn-of-the-century American oil prospector, slowly and completely consumed by greed, ambition, paranoia, prospector, slowly and completely consumed by greed, ambition, paranoia, and a bottomless hatred of his fellow man. And he built the towering role from the ground up with his usual monastic, obsessive dedication, developing the character's now legendary, endlessly imitated, rolling and grandiose old-fashioned, ambitioned woven be, instead his head held. But this particular transformation carries with it a genuine cautionary tale about the real human cost of his all-consuming method, one that is worth telling openly and honestly, because his complete and total refusal to ever break character, even for a moment between takes, had very real and damaging consequences for at least one of the people working alongside him. His fellow actor Kel O'Neill, who had originally been cast in a significant supporting role in the film, was reportedly so deeply unnerved, rattled, and worn down by Day-Lewis's relentless, unbroken off-camera intensity, by being coldly stared down, loomed over, and quietly intimidated by the fearsome, hateful Plainview even between takes with no relief or respite whatsoever, that his nerves eventually gave out on him entirely partway through the long 60-day shoot, and he ultimately had to leave the production, altogether replaced in the pivotal part by the young actor Paul Dano, who went on to face Lewis in some of the film's most famous scenes. It is a striking and important illustration of the genuine double edge of that kind of total, unbroken immersion, the very same relentless intensity that produced one of the greatest, most towering screen performances of the entire 21st century, could also be genuinely difficult, draining, and even overwhelming for the fellow actors and colleagues caught directly in its path, day after day, with no respite. Day-Lewis, it seemed, simply could not or would not ever switch the character off, not even when it plainly cost the people around him their nerves and their peace of mind. It is as impressive as it is, honestly, a little disturbing, and it speaks to a commitment so absolute that it left little room for the ordinary human comfort of the set. The performance itself is a towering, undisputed masterpiece for the ages. The actual making of it was, for at least one unfortunate man, quite simply more than he could stand or endure. That is the price, it seems, of a genius that refuses to ever come up for air. Abraham Lincoln in Lincoln. And the sixth and final transformation is the one that gloriously crowned his entire career, earning him his historic, record-breaking, and still unmatched third best actor Oscar, and permanently cementing his status as the greatest screen actor of his age. And it saw him disappear completely into the single most famous, most revered, and most daunting figure in all of American history. For Steven Spielberg's stately acclaimed 2012 biographical epic, Day-Lewis took on the almost impossibly intimidating role of President Abraham Lincoln, a part so weighty that the great Liam Neeson had originally been attached to it, and he approached it with exactly the same all-consuming, no half-measures totality that he brought to everything else he ever touched. He spent ruffle a kafweer en die teeg immersives tening batardi penangeniken. The Ninam rule the Nayaredov, Amdul Badabenabis Kenum. A fat over biddy to Matavabawaban, I've been a many. His letters and his matter and his times, and he made one crucial, subtle, and much discussed artistic choice about the president's very voice, rather than adopt the deep, booming, stentorian, heroic baritone that popular imagination and generations of statues had always lazily assigned to the towering figure of Lincoln Day-Lewis, drawing carefully on heroic baritone that popular imagination and generations of statues had always lazily imitable. Then, id him, id vir perp, were there id bound to uraid, biduwekentalvig. And on the set, of course, he never once broke character. Throughout the entire lengthy production, Day-Lewis insisted, quietly but absolutely, on being addressed by the whole cast and crew only as Mr. President or simply as Abraham, flatly refusing to answer to or even acknowledge his own real name for the duration of the shoot. And he reportedly signed and sent his text messages to the director Steven Spielberg in the elevated, formal, courtly 19th century voice and manner of Lincoln himself, staying fully inside the skin and the soul of the 16th president through every single waking hour on camera and off. Co-stars have said that meeting him during that time felt genuinely like meeting Lincoln. The result of all that obsessive, monastic, year-long immersion was a portrayal so gentle, so weary, so deeply wise, and so hauntingly in me and unexpectedly human that it took the most mythologized, most marble-enshrined, most quoted figure in all of American history, and somehow made him feel, once again, like a living, breathing, grieving, exhausted, and profoundly good man that you could reach out and touch across the centuries, and it duly and rightly won Daniel Lee's unprecedented, record-shattering award, the towering feat of the cinema. Record Everett and Tower in the Senate, and to this day, still unmatched Third Academy Award for Best Actor, and to this day unmatched Third Academy Award for Best Effort. So what is the honest and genuinely astonishing takeaway from the many extreme transformations of Daniel Day-Lewis? Look back over this whole extraordinary, almost unbelievable list laid out end to end, and you slowly come to realize that you are not really looking at the ordinary career of a talented movie star at all, but it's something much closer to a series of controlled, self-willed possessions. A singular man repeatedly and deliberately losing himself so utterly and so completely inside another human being that he willingly risked his health, his physical safety, his comfort, his relationships with his colleagues, and on at least one very real occasion, his very life. He starved himself in the wilderness and ate only what he could kill, refused to leave a wheelchair or feed himself for months, locked himself alone in real solitary confinement, went completely without sleep for 3 days and nights, nearly died of pneumonia rather than break character to see a doctor, and answered only to the name of a long-dead president. His battles were never petty feuds with rival actors or squabbles over billing and money and vanity. His one true, relentless, all-consuming opponent was always the character itself, and the impossible, haunting question of just how completely a living person can vanish entirely into another soul and still find his way back. That total, monastic, almost religious dedication is precisely why he is so deeply revered by everyone who cares about the craft, and it is also, quite honestly, very likely part of why the profession eventually took such a heavy toll on him that he chose, twice, to walk away from it, retiring for good at the very height of his powers, because the quiet impulse to stop, as he himself put it, had slowly hardened into a compulsion that he simply could not ignore any longer. In the end, Daniel Day-Lewis was never really a movie star in any conventional, ordinary sense of that phrase at all. He was something far rarer, far stranger, and far more extreme and uncompromising than that. A man who treated every single role he ever accepted as a total, absolute, all-consuming disappearance of his own self, who gave more of himself, of his body and his mind and his sanity, to his art than almost anyone in the history of the craft ever has, and who, precisely because he simply could not and would not ever do it any other way, gave us in return some of the most breathtakingly, achingly real and human performances the cinema has ever known, or is ever likely to know again. His enemies were never other actors. His only true adversary was the outer edge of human possibility itself, and time after time he walked right up to it and disappeared straight through.